Hello everyone, welcome to today's lecture. The second half of the semester, we'll be looking at sports governance. In the previous two lectures, we spent time to look at the basic principles of sports governance, and we also learned about how we are able to develop our policies in the organizations. Starting from this week, we will look at different sports industry setters and how those industry has been structured and what are the main policy has been developed in those industries. So this week we will be looking at high school athletics, and later we will also look at the topics like college sport, we'll look at professional sports, we'll look at the international sports governance. Okay, before we start looking at the governance issues in high school athletics, I would like to show you a quick video. So this video is very short. They could show you about the trend in high school sports participations in the last 50 years in the United States, starting from 1970s to 2018. Okay, so this video is very short, but it's actually very interesting that give you an idea about the numbers of the sports participants in the high school athletics in the last 50 years. And also give you some number and let you know about the sports participants based on the genders and the comparisons between the 2008 to 2009 to 2018 to 2019. You find out the big changes in terms of sports has been participated by boys and girls, right? It's actually pretty interesting when we look at those informations. When we look at those data, we find out that sports participation in high schools has been increased for about 30 years in a row since 1988. But starting from 2018 to 2019, the numbers started to decline for the first time, right? And so now let's think about why the number started to decline in the 2018 and 2019. And people also predict the trend that in the future, the numbers of the sports participation in the high school level will also continue be decline in the future, right? So there are multiple different reasons behind this. The first of all, we find out some of the sports like football and basketball, right? They has been declined significantly in the last 5 years in a row, right? We find out they also have the decline in the numbers of the public schools students in the last couple of years. They also find out that's a trend in the future. The numbers of the students enrollments in high school will be declined. Right. Another reason is the numbers of the homeschool students actually has been increased in the last couple of years. Like parents started trying to find alternative way, try to develop a better opportunity to grow their children at home instead of like sending them to the schools, right? So those are another reasons to contribute to the trend that why the numbers of the sports participations in high school has been declines. Of course, nowadays students have a lot more other entertainment options. A lot of students really enjoy playing computer games. They have a lot more other entertainment activity rather than participating in sports. And also, that's a study shows, and the parents nowadays rather spend more money to club sports, which might also impact the sports participations in the high school athletics. Right. Also, when we look at these two tables, right, it's kind of interesting. You find out some sport, their popularity has been growing significantly, and some sports popularity has been declining. Right. Football, for instance, you find out the participation has been declined in high school levels, and also basketball is a similar trend, right? The participation also has been declined. Women basketball is also the same, right? Women basketball also has been declined significantly in the last 10 years, right? Think about why those sports participations rate has been declines, right? For football, for instance, obviously we have a lot of like safety concern. Last couple of years, we have a lot of media reports about the concussion issue. There's currently suffering by a lot of football players. So that actually has impact the numbers of the boys playing the footballs. But when we look at some sports participation has been declined, we also look at some sports, their popularities has been increased in the US. Right, when we look at particularly soccer, for instance, it has been growing really faster among boys, and also girls is the same. Soccer also has been growing really faster. Right, some other sport like cross country, track and field also has been increased significantly, and also pretty interesting. We see volleyball, both boys volleyball and girls volleyball, they all has been increased significantly in terms of participation in the high school levels. Right, so that is actually a kind of interesting trend. Another sport is lacrosse. Lacrosse popularity also has been increased significantly in the last couple of years. So they find out sports developments, sports participation and engagement has been impacted by many different factors. So from this picture, I'm showing you about different state, the popularity of the sport are different. Right, based on the states, you find out track and field are really popular in the Midwest, right? And a lot of different, even West Coast, right? Basketball are popular in certain states, but football are very popular in the South, still the number one sports in the South. And also you find out East Coast, people started playing soccer more than the other sports. It's actually kind of interesting to see how those sports preferences has been changes states by states and year by years. Okay, so this is give you a brief idea about sports participation in the high school level. So in today's class, we're going to look at high school athletics, the history. We're going to introduce about the organization structure. We'll talk a little bit about their mission statements. We're going to look at their school, state levels high school athletic association. And also we're going to look at some of the key policy areas in the high school athletics. So speaking of the high school athletics, they basically have 4 different levels of the governing bodies involved. The highest levels is NFHS, which is the national governing bodies for the high school athletics. And then we have state levels of high school athletic association. And also we have school districts levels of athletics administrations, and also we have individual schools. So they actually have 4 levels of the involvements here, right? Speaking of the history of the high school athletics, so the private school was actually the first one to provide athletics participation opportunities. So the start of the high school athletics started in 18th centuries. Sport at that time has been considered as a vehicle to help to deal with some of the social illness, right? And for the high school, they started to introduce PE courses. So one of the first school that introduced the PE courses was Round Hill School in Massachusetts. So that was the first one to promote physical well-being of the students as part of their high school's formal missions. Most of the activities at high school levels were mainly organized by campus-based clubs at their times. Compared to private schools, the public school were much slower to embrace the value of the exercise and plays. So for the high school athletic at the very beginnings, so they're not just outlet for the physical activities, but they also has been considered as a vehicle for developing community tie with the classroom and alumni. So studies show in 1918, so 1 of 9 children graduate from high schools, right? So with the sports participations in high school has been growing significantly. In 1890s, administrators realized it's necessary for them to expand their authorities. Um, One of the big problems they identified in the high school athletics was the overemphasis on winnings. So they realized it actually is the right time for them to get involved into the organizations of the high school athletics competitions. So those whole things starting from the state level first. So one of the example I introduced about the Michigan State Teacher Associations. They introduced the rules. So in this rule, they create the basic standards for students athletes. So if you want to participate in the school sports in high school, you need to get the minimum course loads. You will have to have the satisfactory process and participation eligibility certifications. So in 1921, so there were 5 states from the Midwest. They founded the Midwest Federation of the State High School Athletic Association. Right. So those 5 states, including Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Um, and then more and more state levels high school athletic associations started to join these associations in 1923. The National Federations of State High School Athletic Association was founded. Um, so this is about the brief histories of the high school athletics. NFHS is abbreviation for the national levels of the High School Athletic Association. So they have the missions. So look at the mission statement is they try to serve its members by providing the leaderships for the administrations of the education-based high school athletics and activity through the writings of the playing rules that emphasize health and safeties, educational programs that develop leaders, and administrative support to increase participation opportunities and promote sportsmanship. When we look at their mission statement, right, they indicate 4 things, right? The 4 things they say they want to provide leadership to all high school athletics, right? Provide leadership to whole high school athletic. The second thing they indicate in that mission statement is they try to create rules to emphasize health and safeties. And the third thing is they try to increase participation for all the different levels, right? And also one of the another very important mission for them to indicate that mission statement is they try to promote sportsmanship. So they indicate 4 missions they try to achieve as a national governing bodies. When we look at their duties, so there are some of the main duties, right? The first duties is they are coordinated the certifications for officials because they have a national coach certification, they have official certification. So if a coach they say I want to coach the high school sports, so you need to get the certification. So they set up the principle and they set up the standards for these certifications for these official and the coaches. That's one of their main duties. And the second main duty is they try to issue the rules for 17 boys and girls sports, right? So it's actually pretty interesting is their main revenue sources for the national governing bodies in the high school athletics is they try to sell the publications. They publish rule books, right? So it's interesting that the numbers show that every year they publish 4 million pieces of this material annually, and they sell it to state levels, high school athletic association, and also all the different high schools. Right, so to understand all the different rules, so you need to have the copies. A lot of time the coach will have the copies, right? Students athletes will have the copies, right? So they really help them to generate revenue. So that's one of the main revenue sources for them, right? It's actually to create a rule books and being able to distribute around the countries. So the third main duty for them is they hold national conferences and competitions. So they will provide opportunities for these we say students to share about their experience and skills through organizing the national conferences. However, they don't actually have a national competition for sport. So they do actually organize national competition, but for others, for speeches, for so other activities, but not sports. So those are their main duties. People always like to make a comparison between the NFHS and the NCAA, because NCAA, as we know, is one of the main governing bodies in the college's athletics. So people always like to look at the differences between these two types of governing bodies. So what are the main differences in terms of their sanctioning powers? So when we look at their sanctioning powers, they actually have three main differences here. Right. First of all, is their sanctioning power is really different. For the NFHS, so that has been considered as service organizations because their main members are the state levels high school athletic association. So they don't have a very strong, with a sanctioning power over the members. Right. So the real powers and authorities is raised at the state level because state develop most of the policies for the competitions. We talk about NFHS does not offer really national levels of sports competition, right? So they don't really introduce a lot of policies in terms of the competitions. In the high school athletics, the state is playing most important roles. So they introduce all the different types of policy at the state levels, and all the different states are using very different policies. So states actually the main powers if you look at the governing structures in the high school athletics. But NCAA is different. So NCAA has a much stronger sanctioning powers over members, right? Because their members are the institutions, so they set the rules for all those members. So all the members have to follow their rules in order to maintain their stacks in the NCAA. So that's the first thing. The sanctioning power is different. NCAA has a much greater sanctioning power compared to NFHS. Second thing is about their memberships are really different, right? NCAA we talked about previously, their main members are those individual institutions. NFHS, their members are the state levels of the high school athletics association. So their members are not individual schools. Their members are the state levels high school athletic association. So their memberships are kind of different. The third difference is about their sports involvement is also different. So for the NCAA, they only cover sports. They organize sports competition national wise, and they oversee how sports has been organized in in the university levels national wise, right? For the NFHS, they're different. So under its umbrella, NFHS has 6 professional associations, right? So they organize competition not in sports mainly, but they organize a competition in like speech competition, debate competition, and theater competition. So they're not just cover sports, but also cover a lot of other issues in the high schools. So those are 3 main differences between the NCAA and NFHS. So let's look at their organizational structures. So National Federation of the High School Athletic Association. So the organization structures involve 3 parts. First part is called National Council. So National Council is legislative bodies. So their main job is they develop rules for all 17 sports for boys and girls. For them, so they have 51 members. We have 1 representative from each of the state associations. We have 50 state plus the federal districts, right? So they have 51 members here. So each state will have 1 vote when they decided to make the changes in the rules, right? So for National Council, they normally meet twice a year. to discuss about whether they need to make some of the potential changes to current constitutions and bylaws in the high school athletics. So these are national councils. And the second level is called board of directors, though they have a 12 members panel selected by the national councils. So these 12 members, there are 8 members from each of the geographies associations, and they also have 4 at-large members, right? So for the board of the directors, so their main duties is they oversee the budget every year. They also work really closely with all the different committee, the standing committee, as we introduced previously. In the sports government lecture, we talk about standing committee, that, right? So they mainly be responsible for some of the duties. So they oversee those standing committees, right? And they also have executive staff. Right, so a lot of time they also oversee the investments and management of those funds, and they try to establish standard for the rules, right? So those are board of director, their main duties. And the lower ones is called administration staff. So administration staff, they mainly deal with day-to-day operations. So they work at the headquarters and to deal with some of the basic things on a daily basis. Right, so this is organizational chart for the NFHS. The textbook has a more better, clear version. So I'll just give you a brief idea. You know how the chain of commands looks like in this organizational chart, right? National councils, right? They basically made a major decision about all the rules for sports. Board of directors, they meet more often, discuss some of potential issue and deal with the budgets, as we talked about previously. And executive staff, they're more like a supporting staff, right? They deal with the day-to-day operation. So this is organizational structures within the National Federation of High School Athletic Associations. We talk about high school athletics governance structure. They involve 4 levels. There are mainly 3 levels, the 3 types of governing bodies. One is the national level, and then the state levels, and then it's school district levels. When we're done talking about national levels, so we would like to focus on the state levels high school athletic associations. In Ohio, we have OHSAA, right? Ohio High School Athletic Associations. In different states, they will have a state level athletic association. As we mentioned previously, state levels athletic association actually have the real powers in high school athletic developments because they really decide the rules and the policies for developing the high school athletic associations. So for the state high school athletic association, so they are the regulatory body for the high school sports in that particular state. Right, so they also include some of the Provincial Association of Canada. They are also affiliate members of the NFHS. So for their main responsibilities, they're mainly responsible for organizing state levels of the championship. If you look at high school sports, you know the state champions is basically the biggest competitions for these athletes and the teams. Right, also they try to maintain the educational philosophy for the high school athletics, right? So their members includes either public or private secondary schools in their states, right? So for each divisions, they normally have their own rules. So for the mean revenue for the state levels high school athletic association is they mainly generate revenues from organizing state levels of competition. They can generate a lot of money from that, right? They can also generate revenue from the membership deals, from those board contract, from the sponsorships, and selling those publications. We have a lot of different state and state levels of the high school athletic association can be classified into 3 different types. One type, which is the most common one, voluntary state association. So for their members, those members are completely volunteer. Any of the public school or private school, if you want to become the members of their state level athletic association, they could do that, right? and they only organize competition to these members. So if it's a high school and private school, if they are not like members, they are not allowed to participate in the competitions, right? So most of the states actually are using the volunteer states associations. Um, and also another very common one is a state association affiliated with the state departments of the education. So currently about 11 states are using these kind of models, right? So they have a direct link with the State Department of Educations, but they're not governed by state. They still have a lot of big freedoms in terms of the governing some of the issues. And also the third types of the models in the State High School Athletic Association is a University Direct State Association. So there are three states, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. So they house their state level association in the college and the school of education on one of the university campuses, right? So they are freestanding organization with the board and the bylaws. So those are three different types of model has been utilized in the state high school athletics associations. So that's the second levels of the governance in the high school athletics. And the third levels is about school districts, right? We have a big school district. We also have a small school districts. So they're actually using a very different governance structures. So for the small school districts like Talawanda school districts, they only have one middle school and one high school. So those we consider as a small school districts, right? So for those small school districts, they're more likely to use something called centralized structures, right? Later we're gonna talk about centralized structures, right? And but we also have a very big sports districts. They have more than 100 high schools, so it will be very difficult for them to oversee so many high schools if you're using centralized structures. So they were using decentralized structures, right? For the centralized structures, right? So one of the unique characteristics is they have the vertical reporting relationships, right? So they often characteristic as a chain of commands, right? So we'll give you an example for the athletic directors. So they're mainly responsible for hiring all the district coaches, and they also have a campus coordinator at each of the middle school to oversee the daily athletics administration duties. Right, for an AD in this kind of small school districts or private schools, so for these athletic directors, they will have to go and report to the high school principal directly, right? And they also oversee the campus athletic coordinators. So that's what the models looks like. So for these small school districts, so those AD normally will have more than one titles. They also will be served as a coaches. Sometimes maybe they're PE teachers. Sometimes they even like the high school principals. For the centralized structures, they have some advantage. They also have some problems. So one of the advantage for using centralized structures is obviously it has very clear chain of commands, right? AD is mainly directly reported to high school principal. They understand who they need to report it to. So the structure is very clear, straightforward, right? They also have a very clear focus visions, right? And in terms of costs, right, they could save a lot of money because you don't have a lot of managers in between. In terms of decision making process, obviously is going to be very quick. So those are the benefit. But the potential problem for these centralized structures are so they have a very limited commitments, and also they have a poor creativities, right? So those are the centralized structures. And also we have a decentralized structure, right? For the decentralized structures, right, we have some school district, maybe they have more than 100 high schools to oversee those school districts, such as basic sports districts, using centralized structures may not be able to solve a lot of the problem and issues, right? So they have to use decentralized structures. So one of the characteristics for the decentralized structure is they allow do reporting relationships, right? For the school districts AD, they normally responsible for coordinating all athletics activities. But for schools athletics directors, so they have a two reporting relationship. So they are not just reported to their own high school principal to let them know about the sports activity has been organized in that particular high school. They also are responsible to report it to district athletic directors. For the district athletic directors, sometimes they also mainly responsible for organizing some of the competitions between some of the high school within that particular districts, right? So those are the characteristic for the decentralized structure that has been utilized by the high school athletics. So this kind of structure are mainly utilized by the public school districts, big public school district when they have more members, right? So those are the differences between the centralized structure and decentralized structure. One last topic we would like to talk about in today's class is we're going to talk about some of the key policy areas in the high school athletics. Right, so we're basically going to look at two main policy. Right, one policy is eligibility rules. Right, and the second big policies is some of the policy and rules related to the homeschool students. Right, first of all, let's look at the eligibility rules. So to understand the eligibility rules, so we're going to introduce four different eligibility rules: academic eligibility rules, age eligibilities, whether they allow people to transfer, and also redshirting rules. So you have to understand the basic principle for the high school athletic to introduce eligibility rules is the participating in high school athletics is a privilege, not a right. So that is not a right guaranteed by law. You have to understand attending school until your age is your right, everyone's right. But participating in school sports in high school is a privilege, not a right. So this participation are completely voluntary, right? So if you look at the high school students' athletics eligibilities, they could include your abilities, include your academic standings, your age, your citizenship, about your educational affiliation, about gender, about grades in school, about place of residence. So all these rules are basically developed in the state level. We talk about all the different states. We're using very different rules, right? So first of all, let's go and look at the academic eligibility rules. So academic eligibility rules, basically we also consider it as a no pass, no play rule. Most of the states, their rules are very clear. Basically, if you don't pass the course, that will require you to pass, and you cannot play sport in high school levels. Right. So one of the biggest benefit is most of the states are using NCAA's cleaner house standards. Right. NCAA's cleaner house standards is people would have to complete some of the core courses, and then you maintain the minimum GPA of 2.0, and then you'll be able to eligible to apply for colleges athletics, right? So most of the states are also using this principle. So one of the biggest benefit is very easy for students to prepare when they graduate from high school, when they decide to apply for athletic scholarships in college levels, so that's very easy for them to prepare. We're using Ohio as example. So all these athletes in high school, they need to pass 5 subjects, right? However, you have to know no rule is perfect. All the rule and policy, we try to protect the majority of the stakeholders interested, but we're not considering about everyone's interested, right? So who will be impacted by these rules, right? So there are two kind of peoples who will be impacted. So what will be the potential problems, right? First one is that those individuals impacted most by these policies are those students who are struggling academically in high school. Right? For some students, right, being able to participate in sports is their main motivation to stay at schools, right? So if we are taking this chance away, so these students may be really likely is unable to stay in the schools, right? They are more likely to drop out, right? So that will impact those kind of students a lot when they are not be able to, stay eligible to play sports, right? So they will be very likely to become high school dropouts. So that's one of the problem. The second problem is some students, in order to meet these kind of requirements, so they try to choose less challenging curriculums, so they don't have to put themselves in the academic jeopardy. So that create another issues here. That's about the academic eligibility. So the textbook provide more information. You can go and look at this about the academic eligibility rules introduced in the textbook. So the second eligibility rules is about age eligibility rules. So basically, they allow the students to be eligible for 8 semesters and need to be finished in 4 years. The purpose is they try to promote the fairness in the competition because right, older boys and girls they might have some physical advantage compared to younger boys and girls if they allow like 21 22 years old students play against the 15 16 years of students, they might be unfair for the competitions, right? So this is about age eligibility rules. Right, the third eligibility rules is about transfer rules. So most of the state levels rules say they don't encourage student transfer from one high school to another high school just for participating sport. But the purpose is they try to maintain the idea of the students starting and ending their academic career in the same high schools. Right, so they don't encourage students to transfer one school to another schools. So the question is, why does high school athletics are not encouraging transferring? So the one thing is they try to have a fair and equal chance to play to the students rather than just winnings. Right. The second thing is high school athletics, unlike clubs, right? So they are decided to be centered around the communities, right? And to teach individuals to service the school, not another way around. So transferring from one school to another schools may be potentially undermining these kind of values, right? So that's why they don't encourage transferring students from, just for playing sport. You transfer one school to another schools. However, we also do need to consider about some of the issue is a lot of time for the high school students. You're transferring from one school and to another school is nothing you can control. A lot of time, why people would like to transfer but have to transfer is because of the family relocation. Maybe your parents find a job in the different states, in a different city, different school districts, so you have to go and relocate it in the new school districts, right? And the second thing is maybe your parents are separated, so you have to be with your mom or with your dad, so you have to, change the schools. That's nothing's under your controls as a high school students. So they also create some challenges. So there's a lot of questions about this transfer rule has been introduced in high school level. Is should students be punished for their family's problems? They may result in the relocation to another school districts, right? If you look at Ohio's high school athletic associations, so they have a very specific rules in terms of how the students' eligibilities will be impacted by transferring. So they say basically if a student transfer between these two school districts with more than 50 miles, right? So their eligibility will not be impacted. But if student transfer between the school district within the 50 miles, so their eligibilities will be impacted. For instance, if you play maybe 3 games for these teams, right? So when you start with the new teams, with new schools, you cannot play for that season. You have to wait for next season to play, right? So those are the rule has been introduced, in the Ohio High School Athletic Association, right? So transfer students might lose some eligibilities for a period of time at the new schools. So that's the third rules, transfer. So in high school, they basically do not encourage students to transfer from one school to another school. And the last eligibility rule is about redshirting rules. Redshirting rules, you talk about delaying a student's athletics completions for extending their athletic career. This is very common in the colleges, right? You find out some college students maybe they could extend their athletic careers by delaying their students' athletic competitions. But in the high school levels, this is prohibited, right? Students are not be able to delay their completions. Again, it's very similar to the age eligibility rules, right? Because if you allow students to delay their completions, they might create some unfair competition advantage, and also may also create some dangerous mismatches. Right. So this is about eligibility rules. One last rules we would like to talk about is related to homeschool students. Right. If from this chat you'll be able to see, homeschool, the number of the homeschool students has been growing significantly in the United States. Right. So parents chose to homeschool their students for a lot of different reasons, right? Studies show maybe they want to develop a better relationship between parents and child. They don't want to separate for a very long period of time, right? And also they try to avoid those improper pressure to the children's, right? Being educated at home maybe it's better for children to grow and with less pressures, right? And sometimes it's because those children have some special interests or special talents, so they would like to provide more resources to help them develop their talents. So one of the examples, I'm not sure how many of you following swimming, though that's currently a U.S. swimmer called Michael Andrew, who has been considered as the next Michael Phelps. Right, so Michael Andrew currently is 21 years old, preparing for his first Olympic Games in Tokyo. So he's basically been homeschooling since he was 13 or 14 years old. He became a professional swimmer when he was only 14 years old, right? So his family have the resources and to help them to develop their own swimming pool at home. So he's able to train at home, and they hire coaches, and he's able to find their own sponsors as well, to help them to develop their skills in swimming. So that's become kind of common right now. So in the U.S. currently, we don't have a national legislation to provide this guideline whether we should allow homeschool students participate in sports or not, right? But that 34 state show that homeschool students are able to play the high school sports, right? And the big discussions about whether we should allow the homeschool student to play in the high school athletics. One opinion people would say, right, these homeschool students, that their parents are also paying the tax, right? So this tax they pay also fund the public education, so they should have the right to compete at the high school athletics. However, another big opinions who disagree with the idea of having those homeschoolers participate in high school athletics are they think those homeschool students they don't really meet the academic eligibility requirements. So it will be really difficult for the high school to include them in their athletic competitions because they don't have the verified curriculum material. They don't have the assessment data which are required for the other high school students to participate in sport, right? So there are a lot of different kind of discussions right now. But from the data, we can see more and more states started to provide these homeschool students the opportunity to participate in sport. Right, in 2007, 24 states allowed them to participate in sport. 2013 is the 30th state the recent survey shows that 34 states currently allow the homeschooler to play high school sport. In today's reading, and also I give you the opportunity to go and look at this issue from different states' perspective. So I hope that you can read this reading very carefully, because in one of the quiz question that you'll be dealing with today, that you will have to, to go and find out the answer from these readings. Okay, so this is some of the policies in the high school athletics. So one last thing I want to remind you is today you will need to complete an online quiz. This online quiz is 10 points, currently available on Canvas. This 10 points quiz include a couple of multiple choice questions and a couple of short answer questions. So all the answer for the quizzes is coming from today's lecture and the reading. So I really strongly encourage you to read the reading and watch the videos. And you have 20 minutes to complete, right? So make sure you complete the quiz by Fridays. Okay, that's it for today.